This is going to be a fun talk. I think this is a super duper important topic. I'm very, very, very extraordinarily passionate about it. I've seen it redefine our company and the way that we manage the people that we work with, and I know that it is representative of a good way of doing business. So basically this is not necessarily a technical talk, but this is how to use some of the principles that we've learned from open source software development and working in larger communities, and how we bring that back internally so that we can structure our teams, manage our teams, make sure that all of the engineers on the in the company are supporting the direction of the company in a way that makes sense. And as we grow, it becomes more and more of a challenge. It becomes more and more of a conversation. It's very easy to do when you have 2 or 3 people, but as you move to 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 or even 1,000 or 10,000, it starts to become increasingly more difficult. So different techniques are needed to be able to align people and bring them together. My name's Kevin Bridges. I'm a co-founder and CTO of a company called Drupal Technology. We make a tool, a local development tool called DDEV. We also do a hosting platform called DDEV Live, which is a Kubernetes-based system, which I think is pretty nice. So basically, what it boils down to is the principles necessary to engage open source communities should apply to organizations. Gallup did a poll that basically concluded that we're having a worldwide employee engagement crisis. Less than 1/3 of employees are committed engaged. Of those, half would leave for a raise of 20% or less, and 2/3 think they can find a job within 2 months. So basically what that means is that if you're going to engage people and you're going to keep people, there's a lot of competition out there that will likely cause good engineers to move on to the next big thing. And unless those people are engaged and motivated to stay, then they're going to move on. If the motivation is money or financial, then they're likely to be easily dissuaded from participating in the project. To have engaged contributors, you need a culture that fosters motivation. So basically, when there is no motivation, when people aren't engaged, they're going to not enjoy their job. They're going to be this gentleman here on the right who's basically sleeping at the desk. It doesn't, they're showing up, they're filling a spot, they're not super productive. It's just, it's not what you want in an organization. It's not what you want when you wake up to get out of bed to go to work in the morning. I mean, it's not motivating. So in order to have those types of contributors, you need to consider a couple of different things. You need to look at goals, attitude, success, motivation. There's just a whole bunch of components that work together to get people, out of that chair in the right and actually participating. So in order to really have this conversation, I think the number one thing that we need to start talking about is what exactly is motivation? And most people, I don't think, understand that. So there's this gentleman out there named Dan Pink who does a video, and the link's that bit.ly RSA Motivate if you want to take a look at it. It is a fantastically done video. It's called The Surprising Truth About What Motivates Us. And what it boils down to is that we're not as endlessly manipulatable as people think. So essentially what ended up happening is the Federal Reserve worked with MIT, 2 very conservative organizations, to do a financial study to find out what it takes to motivate people. And they made the base assumption that in order to motivate people, we have to give them more money. And if we motivate people properly by incentivizing them with money, then we're going to be able to get better performance out of them. And that seems logical based off of everything that we know as this society. But in fact, what they found was kind of shocking. It kind of didn't jive with what they were thinking they were going to find. So they did a 3-tier approach. And they gave physical tasks basically to start with. And what they figured out is they could award somebody if they did. Baseline, you get 1 rate. If you do a little bit above baseline, you get another rate, maybe another extra $50 or something like that. If you far outperform everybody else, you're going to get an extra $100. And what they figured out is that as long as the task was physical and people didn't have to use cognitive ability, they didn't have to think about it, they were actually able to increase performance by increasing monetary reward. Up to a limit. There's a finite physical limit that you're eventually going to hit. But what they found out is that once you introduce cognitive thinking, you get diminishing returns by increasing money. So what does that actually mean? And they didn't believe it at first. So they're like, wait, so the more we pay people, the more they have to think, the less performance we're going to get out of them. That didn't jive. So what they did is they went to India, where salaries are on a different scale. And they said, okay, well, for the low tier, we'll give you 1 month's worth of salary if you perform at a base level. For the medium tier, 2 months worth of salary. For the high tier, 3 months worth of salary. They started with MIT graduates. They assumed that the money was not the real motivator there, so they needed to make money a motivator. And they duplicated the results almost identically. So the people that were on a base level, they did okay. The people that were more and more compensated did worse and worse as far as cognitive tasks were concerned. So that just defied all kinds of logic. And this is kind of going through a little bit. The typical motivation scheme with organization focuses on money. What we are determining is that money isn't what's going to get people to form an effective organization. Typical scheme involves rewarding top performers financially. You ignore the bottom performers, and the people in the middle are acknowledged and get a little bit. So they're kind of your main team, basically. Money is a motivator at work, but not how people think. That's basically the takeaway. If you don't pay people enough money, they won't be motivated to do anything. And given all of this, we need to basically ask, what is motivation? What can we use other than money to really motivate people? So there's 3 factors that lead to better performance, and those are really simple. It's autonomy, it's mastery, and it's purpose. Autonomy contradicts traditional management styles. If you want engagement, then self-directed is better. So a typical management scheme, you bring in a CEO, you bring in an executive, they're going to sit down at a board and they're going to say, okay, well, we need to increase sales, so I'm going to go tell the entire company I need to increase sales by 15%. Go. That's a traditional management style. It's not very effective. So autonomy and providing autonomy to the people that are in the company to help drive the direction of the company is not a good fit in a scenario like that. Mastery is the urge to get better at stuff. Music instruments don't make sense economically at all. But people do it because they enjoy it. So, somebody that learns to play the guitar because they enjoy it, there's no financial reward there. They're doing it for some other purpose. What is that purpose they're doing it for? They're doing it for mastery of a craft. They're doing it because they enjoy it, they have purpose, they have autonomy, and they have mastery. So it's almost passionate for them. It's really great. And then purpose, the reason for which something is done or created, or for which something exists. A person's sense of resolve or determination. So if you have autonomy and you have mastery, but you have no goal, you have no purpose or no way to drive the ship, then you're not going to go anywhere. You're just going to, I don't know what you're going to do. You're going to flounder a little bit. So continuing in with what is motivation, open source communities, and this is where Drupal's really amazing, are comprised of people that already have jobs from all over the world that are performing technical work on par with their jobs, but are doing it for free in limited spare time. Again, this defies logic when you're talking about MIT or the Federal Reserve. They didn't understand any of this. You must have purpose to attract better talent. When the profit motive gets unmoored from the purpose motive, bad things happen. Bad products, customer service, etc. And I can give you an example. That scenario where I said, hey, we're going to increase sales by 15%. It's likely that there are other problems in the company that might need to be worked out before that can actually happen. So let's say that there's a human element to increasing sales by 15%. You're suddenly increasing support needs, you're increasing system strain, you're possibly, in my case, I'll talk about our company and the things that we learned. We built a hosting product. So for us, if we want to go get money, we go sell an enterprise client for several $100,000. They bring over several hundreds or thousands of sites, and suddenly we have a huge problem to solve instead of a small problem to solve. So balancing all of this stuff out and understanding what it's going to take to successfully achieve something like, oh, we need to increase sales by 15%, is likely going to come from a different place than from the top down. And in our example, when it's done properly, we can articulate, hey, we need to increase sales. So what does that actually mean to the engineering team here, or the UI team here, or the product team here, or the designers here? And what problems are you facing with on your independent teams that you can solve that will help us meet this objective that we're looking for? So it's starting to become a slightly different way of thinking about things, where you're starting to look at, okay, well, how do I engage the people that are around me to solve the overall objective without specifically telling them every single detailed step that they need to do, because it's very likely that I don't have the right information to be able to tell them that in the first place, because I'm not in their role and I don't have their knowledge. So it's really interesting. And this goes back to the whole concept, which is you have to provide autonomy, mastery, and purpose for people. So if we can provide a little bit of direction, you can provide a purpose, a mission statement, a vision, a good set of values for the company, then you enable people to have autonomy and mastery. You're creating a really good environment, and that's super duper powerful. So how do we do this? There's a couple of steps involved, some of them technical, some of them cultural. We start by building a framework for autonomy and mastery. And for us, that takes a couple of different tacks. If you go to github.com/drud, this is our project page. We use GitHub a lot for communication because there's a good issue system there. There's, a large developer base that already knows how to use GitHub. We have a lot of commonality that eliminates barriers of adoption, essentially, by using GitHub. One of the things that we tend to do, and this goes back to kind of that purpose statement, is we take the time to define who we are as a community, who we are as a company. I feel like very strongly that these types of statements should be completely public, and if you go to our GitHub page, you'll be able to read them or forth them. But this tells you how to engage with us, and this is what everybody that comes into our company reads before they come into our company. This is our onboarding process, in fact. So when you're introduced to the company, you go through the same public-facing documentation that the rest of the world sees. So if somebody from a public open source community wants to engage with us, they follow the same process that an internal developer does. If an internal developer wants to contribute code, then they follow the same process that the open source community does. And that's a very important framework to set up. So what we're doing is we're building a kind of a foundation where people can talk, where they can communicate, where they know what the bounds are, and that they can participate in an active conversation. Governance model is a huge part of that. You need to set safety as part of all of this. You cannot be in a scenario where you don't understand the people that are working with you or that are working for the organization, because if you end up in a scenario where you don't understand everybody's personality or how they might work with each other, then you might create safety issues amongst different people. And a good example that that I tend to fight with the most is very dominant people, right? I'm not a dominant person. I'm as close to antisocial as you're ever going to get. So when somebody is incredibly dominant and they conflict with somebody who is not that dominant, it comes across in a very specific way that's interesting to observe. And typically that comes across as, well, the less dominant person doesn't have the ability to articulate clear enough plans for the dominant person to be able to accept them properly. So there's give and take. And a typical conversation in that scenario might be, okay, I'm the dominant person, tell me the plan. Non-dominant person, we're going to do X, Y, and Z with A, B, and C. Dominant person says, that wasn't a plan. I don't understand what you're saying. So basically, what it boils down to is there's nuance and personality, and creating a safety system where you understand different people's personalities and how they interact with each other is also a very critical component of this. Governance models help set that stage and that expectation. The code of conduct lets people know, hey, you can't be a jerk here. You can't be somebody that's going to cause chaos or stress. And if you are, then it's likely that you're going to be removed from the organization as a result of what's happening here. That helps us attract talent. That helps set the stage for the people that are in the company that it's going to be a safe environment, and it lets people externally know that they can expect safety if they decide to work with us. We continue building a framework for autonomy and mastery by going through, and again, this is all up on GitHub, but this outlines exactly what it takes for somebody to interact with the system. Hey, I have an idea. How do I get it put into a workflow? How do I get it integrated? How do I get it moved into the work of the company? And how do I turn it into something that's actionable and is something that I can create? They need to know exactly how to do that. So there's two components to that. The first one is, well, how do I work with an idea? How do I articulate an idea? And how do I get that so that we can talk about it? The second one ends up being, well, once it's an idea and it's actionable, how do I go about doing something with that? So this is the workflow for the actual development, the code writing. This is where we go through and apply labels. We use labels extensively, actionable, showstopper, incubate. We have a system so that we can go through take an idea and really work it out so that that plan is in place, so that super dominant person understands that it's well defined and the less dominant person understands that the plan's in place and everybody knows that this is what's going to happen. So there's a lot of conversation and a lot of tagging and just workflow items that need to be defined for your entire team, or they're not going to be able to communicate. And if you're running a business and you don't take the time to do that, you're not setting your company up for success, and you're going to end up spending more time fighting than not. One of the things that is very often missed in this type of conversation is the concept of empathy. And it's super duper important because going back to that whole governance model and being able to set a stage of safety and respect for people. If you look, it's a little hard to see here, but Randy, the first thing that he does on both of these comments is he starts with the word thanks. Who responds to issues with thank you? But he does it twice in the same issue. And what that does is you're grateful, you're acknowledging the help, you're acknowledging the people that are working with you, and it sets a stage for a clear communication channel. And I feel like that is very, very critical and something that we miss a lot in the issue queues. So just empathy is a huge part of this, and embedding that inside of the team is a core fundamental job of the people that are running these organizations. Another thing that approaches the more technical side of it is once you understand what it is that you're trying to do and how you want to do it, then you have to be able to put checks and balances in place to support your workflows, support your quality controls, support your ethos as far as an engineer or an engineering organization or whatever you're doing. For us, it involves a lot of checks. We go through and run tests on Mac and PC, and we do code linting checks, and these are things that we want to ultimately contribute to the quality of our code across all of our products, so we embed them into everything that we do. Once we have an understanding of what we need to do, it gets represented as a checklist. Once you have a checklist that you can go through and consistently execute, you hand that checklist to somebody else, let them prove that they can go through and consistently execute that checklist, and then automate it in some way, shape, or form. And that type of automation helps out a lot. That exact process of defining a checklist first and then distributing it to somebody else is a critical part of DevOps. It's a critical part of building autonomous systems, and it's a critical part of understanding what it is that you're doing. So, getting into the bulk of the system that I've used to help organize my organization, it is a concept called OKR, Objective Key Results. OKRs came about, I think, in the late 70s, early 80s, if I'm not mistaken, but it came from management school of thought from Intel, essentially. And John Doerr, the gentleman who wrote this book, Measure What Matters, he was the first investor in Google. And he went to Google with this management technique and basically gave it to Marissa Myers and Eric Schmidt and Sergey Brin and that whole garage full of people. And they adopted this almost immediately, and it still runs inside of Google today. I've heard many management techniques before. I've heard concepts of rocks. I've heard all kinds of different ways of setting goals and objectives for an organization. It wasn't until I read this book that it came together as a system for me. So what does that system look like? Number one, you need to know where you're going. So basically, building out a roadmap, having that publicly available is a huge benefit for a lot of people. You need that before you can really kind of decide, what you're going to build. Another thing that we utilize internally is kind of a concept of breaking the day apart or the weeks apart. So what ends up happening, I think, in organizations like ours is you tend to have a lot of people that stay heads down on specific problems for excessive amounts of time. That's not always a healthy thing. They tend to become very good at their problem space, but they also tend to introduce themselves as bottlenecks because they are becoming that good in that problem space. They are not working effectively to share that knowledge amongst the team, and it creates issues later on. You end up with the rock star syndrome, basically, and it's not it's not a healthy thing. If you can distribute the knowledge, make it shared a little bit more, break up the day, it gives people the ability to refocus, refresh, and just kind of come back to things new. So here's an example of one of the things that we do. We have specific days where we won't do much coding at all. We'll go through and we'll do retrospectives, backlog grooming, and sprint planning. We'll just sit down and talk for most of the day. And that's a good thing because it stops people from coding, it stops people from having to deal with the stresses that they're dealing with and talk about the problems that they're actively trying to solve. And then we go through, a structured period of coding with a specific time to stop, so that then we move into a QA process, essentially. We don't have to do any of this because our systems are continuously deployable. We have A/B deployments. We do this because it is good for people to be broken up this way so that they can continue to function without being overwhelmed. I would encourage people to consider it. It's maybe a little different than your typical school of thought, which is, hey, you come in at 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., you need to be coding the whole time. If that's not going to produce healthy, happy, autonomous people. We use the concept of projects inside of GitHub to manage all of these. So basically what ends up happening is during our planning sessions, we'll go through and put all of these projects on the board. There's automation that happens in here, so as tickets are moved through the system, we have reporting in real time to know what goes on. I can go on to any of my team pages at any time and see exactly where that team is in the process for the sprint that they're working on without having to ask anybody. That is a critical part of these systems. One of the things that I got pulled into a lot with, as we start getting funding, as we start growing the business a little bit more, as you start having to do more reporting. Some of that reporting involves board conversations or financial conversations, and being able to bridge the gap between finance and technology to help everybody understand what's going on becomes very difficult, very time-consuming, and can be very overwhelming if you're not doing it properly. Utilizing systems like this, we have the ability to surface it into essentially a spreadsheet. And let me see if I can get out of this and actually pull up one of those spreadsheets to show you what they look like. Kind of a little hard to see here, but this is how I run our company. This is our Q3 OKRs. So basically the general concept behind OKRs is you start with 3 to 5 of them, and that's a magical number. There's some rules around them before engaging with them. So the first rule is that you're never shooting for 100% completion. And that sounds kind of odd. But your target is 60 to 70% completion. The reason for that is that if you tell a team that they have to hit 100% of their targets in a quarter, then that team is likely to stagger the targets so that they can hit them in that quarter. Whereas if you set the expectation that we're only expecting to hit 60 to 70%, it's likely that the team will stretch and create stretch goals that they might be able to get in because they know that there's no nothing wrong if they don't hit that mark. It's good to have a stretch goal. It's good to be like, well, if we can get this in, let's do it, versus, well, if we don't get this in, we don't get 100%, so suddenly I'm not going to get my quarterly bonus or whatever. You don't ever tie OKRs to financial recompensation. You don't ever associate them with performance reviews, but you do require everybody to participate in them, and that is a key part of this entire system. So for us, these are our Q3 OKRs. We wanted to have 5 day-to-day development steps are demonstrable against our live production cluster via CLI. We wanted to fully migrate and onboard some clients that we're working with. We wanted to increase our platform stabilization, and we wanted to increase our TAM tooling. If we go into the reporting part of this, towards the end of the quarter, you'll see some interesting numbers up here. We had the ability to go through and we use another system on GitHub called ZenHub. ZenHub allows us to associate epics and story points with the tasks that are being built out. So each of these links basically goes to a GitHub issue. That GitHub issue is a placeholder that's put in place by a project manager that's assigned to a team lead. So basically what I'm doing is I'm building a reporting system so that I can see exactly what the company's working on, who's doing it, and what the exact progress is. Now I have a tool that I can go to the board and say, hey, you can read this spreadsheet too. I don't need to translate this for you. So suddenly my reporting requirements go down significantly because everybody's looking at the same document. The entire company is capable of looking at this document and understanding what everybody in the company is working on. And that's a very critical piece. For us, we've been doing this this will be our second quarter, and this redefined our company. I mean, we went from chaos, basically. We thought we were on top of stuff. We were doing good. We were making neat stuff. But it was taking an excessive amount of time. And we kind of felt like we might be thrashing a little bit, but it's hard to see through all of that. A good analogy that you get from the military, interestingly enough, is if you talk to a dishwasher on a naval ship, and you ask that dishwasher what their job is, that dishwasher is going to say, I get up at 4 o'clock in the morning so that I can wash the dishes, so that I can make sure that the kitchen's clean, so that I can feed my troops, because I know that if everybody's fed properly, they've got jobs to do, they're going to go out there, we're going to win the war because they're not hungry. Whereas if you go to McDonald's and ask that same person what their job is, they're like, I need my paycheck so I can get out of here. That massive difference. If you don't understand where you're going as a company, and you don't understand everybody's role in where you're going in as a company, you're never going to get there. So it's real critical to have this type of information. Here, you'll see that we have automation as a result of ZenHub, those epic points. All of that feeds back into the spreadsheet automatically. So when somebody updates an issue on GitHub, it updates the spreadsheet. And then we have a human factor to it. So we're able to go through and say, okay, well, we have the automation in place. The automation is saying that, I don't really have specifics of a good example, but here automation is saying that we're like 29% complete, when in actuality, the people said that we're 75% complete. So there's a checks and balances system in place so that you can go through and just make sure that everything's working out very well. Moving into Q4, again, a little bit more automation, but this breaks down into each of the company teams. Here I have the main company objectives that we're looking for this quarter. Basically create an API so that DDEV Live users can do all of the create, read, update, demand, delete stuff. Customer success is defined and staffed. We've got some additional information, or people are in here now, some additional integrations with Typo 3 and WordPress, essentially, public API coming out, product roadmaps defined, all kinds of good stuff. So this is touching on product, it's touching on marketing, it's touching on engineering, and it's touching on the management team as well. Outbound marketing strategy defined, a couple new customer objectives, and then we move into some of the team-based stuff. So each of the teams, the idea here is that the company, the management team, gets together and defines 3 to 5 objectives that the company wants to achieve. Then we have an on-site, we invite the rest of the company to a common location so that we can sit down and face-to-face talk, and then we work through how to support those objectives if we want to support those objectives, and what it means to support those objectives. So each team then goes back and has a conversation that says, okay, well, these are the 3 to 5 things that we think we need to work on. Let's get those out there first, and then let's go through a process of trying to map what the teams are working on with the company objectives, see where the overlap is, and then evaluate the gaps. So if there's a gap that the company wants to do something that no other team is willing to support, then it's possible that the company objective needs to be changed or modified because the team's telling you something different. So it's a more interactive management style than just top-down dictatorship, and I think it works very well. I've seen amazing results in our organization as a result of implementing this, and it's just, it's fantastic. I absolutely love it. So let's see if we can figure out how to use computers. Here. Present. Okay, well, we'll just kind of fudge it the rest of the way because I think I'm almost out of slides and we can talk a little bit. So basically, to sum it all up, it's our choices that show what we truly are far more than our abilities. If you intentionally create a culture that you can move a group of people in a very specific direction, you can cause them to have that autonomy, that mastery, and that purpose, and make them feel like they're accomplishing something great, then you're basically making yourself way better than you're ever going to be individually. And I think that that's exactly what that represents for me. So given that, I'm going to stop, see if anybody has any questions or comments on this. Like I said, I'm pretty passionate about it, and I know there's a lot of information here. So, anybody?
I have maybe a question for you.
Sure.
Because it is so transparent, what do you do with the back of the herd, the weaker players in there? How do you?
So the question is, what do you do with the people that are not actively working on one of these key objectives?
Or the ones that are just not producing?
But the ones that are not producing,
yeah,
they are removed.
Okay.
And it becomes very obvious through this system who those people are. So if everybody in the company is held accountable to their actions on the OKR, it's very obvious that so-and-so is not participating in the system. That is a red flag. That is an indicator that there needs to be a conversation. If that person is unwilling to participate, then they need to leave. Because it's unfair for the rest of the organization. The other people that are participating, the other people that want to create an amazing environment, want to create amazing tools, and that opens a whole ethical, well, I don't know if ethical is the right word, but a very interesting debate specifically around the talent of the people that might be choosing not to participate. So a lot of times you end up with a very senior engineer who might not want to participate in a specific way. You sometimes have to make very hard decisions, and you have to make them for the betterment of the company, and you have to consider the company to essentially be an organism, and it needs health. And if you allow toxicity to exist inside of that organism, it's going to spread. Anybody else?
So, in terms of forecasting production, if the goal is, or the target is 60 to 70% completion, how do you manage that? Without, I guess, like overstating?
We just set expectations. I mean, all the way up and down the board. So a previous scenario would be, board might be, well, we need an API. What's going on? CEO might say, hey, we'll have the API this quarter. Okay, team, go. We need an API this quarter. It doesn't translate back very well. But if we had set that same expectation with the board, here's what we want that API. We really, really do. But you need to have the same expectation that we might not hit it. We're going to get some of the way there, 60 to 70%. If we overachieve, we're going to hit it 100%. Everybody's in good shape. But it's all about expectation setting up and down the board, all the way down to the customer level, and it's important. It's really hard to do. It's very easy when you're dealing with superiors or finance people to say, yes, we'll do whatever you want. I encourage you not to do that. Proper expectation setting is a huge part of this. You set the right expectation with the community, with that community-facing documentation. You set the right expectation with the team so that they know that if they don't participate, they're going to be removed from the organization. And you set the right expectation with finance and everybody else involved. And if you do that, then the 60 to 70% rule starts making a lot of sense for people.
Okay.
Yep.
Following up on that, I guess just a little bit more on how you decide what matters, how you decide the 3 to 5 things. And so it sounds like you're not saying that one of those things is increasing sales by 20%.
Right.
And so, basically how are OKRs tied back to the financial viability of the company?
Yep.
Or do you have ones that seem to be connected, and then sort of like then how do you measure them? So basically the whole qualifying questions.
Yep. So the question is, how does this relate back to the financial health of the company? How do you track these objectives as it relates to being able to perform and deliver the products on a regular basis? I think that the financial conversation is a bit removed from OKRs and should remain removed from OKRs. Because if you tie finances to an objective, then it defeats the purpose in a certain way. For us, these objectives are all about, accomplishing or creating. They're about creating the product that we know that will then be able to go to sell it. If I have an API, it's not the engineer's job to say, well, okay, now we're going to package that up and sell it, and we expect, this much revenue over the next 6 months. That's a totally different conversation that needs to happen. If we're tasking the engineers to build something that isn't useful for the company, then we're never going to succeed. So I don't think I have a good answer for you. But I believe that the financial conversation is a little bit removed from the OKR process that we practice.
Sales team part of this. So
yep, they are, but more from a customer success perspective. So for me, the entire company's on rotation. The CEO's on VictorOps, the CRO's on VictorOps. Everybody in the company is on call. And what that means is that we share the responsibility, essentially. So our salespeople, our customer success engineers, if a specific website is having a problem and it's one of their customers that they want to reach out and give a call to, then they are paged on the phone, and there's an escalation policy in place that goes through a couple of salespeople so that we make sure that we get the coverage that we need. And that's a critical part of this too, is that, distributing the knowledge and moving people through different roles is a vital part of all of this, because it really unites people. Here's an example. If you don't have a system like this in place and a customer website goes down, a salesperson gets a call from the customer because the customer's like, my site's down. Salesperson hops into a chat room to try and find out why the site's down. They don't have any information. They start pinging people. The engineers may actively be working on a project. They may be working on the solution. They may not even know that it's happened. Either way, the engineers might get annoyed that they're getting pinged by sales, and it's just, there's no fluidity there. There's no cohesiveness. With a system like what I'm describing, the salesperson is on call. The notification system has determined that the site's down before the customer ever calls, has pinged the salesperson already, so the customer's not initiating the conversation anymore. If that salesperson or success manager is not available, it's escalated to the one that is on the shift previous to them, the one that is on the shift after them. If neither of those 3 people answer, then it's escalated to the entire customer success team, and if nobody there answers, then it's escalated to the entire company. And at that point, somebody's going to pick up the phone and make a call. So it all kind of comes together to make it an effective system. I know that was a lot of information, and I don't know if it directly answered what you were looking for, so I hope that was useful. Yes?
You mentioned the performance and the bonuses should never be tied to the OK.
Absolutely.
But then you also mentioned that you use the OKDs to figure out what the weakest link might be for, in the team.
Right. Not participating and not being a part of the system is not tied to finance to me. We pay people respectfully when we hire them, and almost consider that not to be a conversation afterwards, at least when it comes to this type of scenario. So for me, it's just, are you doing your job? Yes, no. And that's kind of a key point of these spreadsheet items and the numbers that are associated with them, is there's no gray area. It's like, did you complete this? 0 to 100%. It's almost binary. Is it done? Yes. No. And that report card becomes very important. When people are not participating in the system, it's very binary, it's very obvious, and they just need to go. Sorry, but that's the way that I see successful companies run. Yep. All right, well, I think we're right at 12 o'clock, so hope you enjoyed it. I like I said, it's valuable. I think it's super valuable information. If you would like to talk more about it, I'm cyberswat on Twitters, and my website's drud.com. Thank you.